this is to refute a common lie put forth by Trinitarians. When I say Trinitarians, I mean people who really believe and will fight for that doctrine. People who just go along to get along. They don't know their God. They'll never know their God. I'm talking about the evil, the pernicious people who promote this and call anyone who denies it a heretic and a liar. My wife and I are confronted with this from time to time, and while they admit it cannot be understood, they call you a heretic for not believing it. And they focus on this one word in the Strong's Dictionary. It's H259. I don't know how to pronounce it properly. I'm not Hebrew. It's something like ECHAD or ECHAD. And they say that means unity. Therefore, three people. And this is a lie. This is a hateful lie, because the Trinity was something that the devil started in the garden when he tried to add to the number of God by suggesting that there could be more than one person like God. But he wanted to be himself and the man and the woman. This is something that he's always done, and he has perfected it, I suppose, in his mind with the Trinity, because now the other gods that God, for thousands of years, told us not to go after, the enemy of God and man has convinced us is God himself. God himself is the other gods that God told us not to go after. That is sick. It is twisted. It is evil. But in a sense, it's genius, because it's got 90-some% of all Christianity believing. And not all of them will fight with you over it. They'll just say, oh, well, never mind. I don't care. It's not that important. All I need is his blessings. So as long as they or them or he or those are blessing me, that's all I care about. Which shows about the degree of what most Christians have as far as their desire, the degree of their desire to know their God, to understand their God, to really care about their God. Most people don't care about him at all. They don't give a hoot about their God. Most Christians don't. That's just a fact. You don't care unless he's giving you stuff. And then you question him when he doesn't do what you think he should. So that's shame on you, Christian, the average Christian. You don't love your God. But that's not our requirement. Our requirement is to get to know him and to surrender to him. And you will love him. You will. But you got to find out he loves you. And you can't know the love of three people. That's perverse. It's absolutely perverse. The God who gave us each other, individuals, we are made in his likeness, is not an individual you can know in that system, in that tradition of men, in that evil, wicked thing. So they take this word ECHAD and they say that it means unity, therefore proving, voila, three people. God's three people. But everywhere it's used, it never means that. When it talks about a person, it's talking about that person. A place, it's talking about that one place. It's not talking about several places or several people. It never does that. Never, ever. That's why I want to get at this, and I'm so fired up, is because it's an evil, twisted lie. And if you know your God is one, but you are not strong on this, and they come at you, and they say, oh, ECHAD, unity, three. These people are evil. They are evil. They hate God. They hate the one God, because they do want to diminish him. They do want to add to the number of him. And there's an example here that is used in Malachi, where this word is used, and I want to burrow down on this. In Malachi 2, starting in verse 10, it says, have we not all one Father? That's that word right there. One Father. And then he backs it up. Has not one God created us? One. So in their mind, they would have to say, have we not all one unity of Father? Has not one unity of God created us? Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. It's insulting to the intelligence. And I understand that the Spirit helps you understand things that to the carnal mind don't make sense. But I don't have a carnal mind. I have the Spirit of God. I have the Spirit of God. I have the mind of Christ. And the mind of Christ informs me that their claim that this is speaking of several people is not only a lie, it is an absolute refutation of the person of God. It is hatred for God. Stop doing this if you believe in the Trinity. You are hating your God. You are hating him. And this is a side note. I bring this up all the time. It's a fact. As a human being, you cannot love each one of, quote unquote, them equally. It's impossible. He gave that example between money and God. But it works when God is divided up. You cannot love each one of them equally. You will have different levels of affection. Therefore, you will love one and hate the other two. It always has to be three for some reason, but even though that third one is always ignored. But you cannot love each one of them equally. I've seen videos where people say, which is your favorite one of the Trinity? Totally blasphemous. Totally hateful. You may be clueless. You may not be thinking, I want to hate God, but you are hating God. That's what you're doing. So he asks this question. When he says it, have we not all one Father? He's asking the question, rhetorical question. The answer is yes. We have one Father. Who is that one God who created us? Why do we deal treacherously with one another? By profaning the covenant of the fathers. So they're profaning the covenant of the fathers because they're going after other gods. That's one of the many things they do. They also diminish the law. But how is it easy for them to diminish the law? It's because they don't really know who their God is, and they're not believing in who their one God is. They are offering sacrifices and incense and all these things to other gods. As soon as you diminish God, you will diminish the law. It goes hand in hand. You cannot do one without the other. And he goes on in verse 11. Judah has dealt treacherously, and an abomination has been committed in Israel and in Jerusalem, for Judah has profaned the Lord's holy institution which he loves. He has married the daughter of a foreign god. He's gone off and diluted God. God gave commands of things to do under the old covenant, and you don't go and marry people who believe in other gods. Solomon is the greatest example of this. He started believing in other gods. You can't help but believe in other gods when you do that, especially when you don't have the Spirit of God dwelling in you. If you have the Spirit of God dwelling in you now and you're joined to someone who doesn't believe in God, well, you can make it because you have God living in you. But back then, we didn't have God dwelling in us, so that's what's going to happen, is you're going to create abomination and commit abomination. So that's what Judah did. Verse 12, may the Lord cut off from the tents of Jacob the man who does this, being awake and aware, yet who brings an offering to the Lord of hosts. If you are awake and aware and you do this willingly, you join yourself to another God and you bring an offering to the Lord of hosts, that's an abomination. It's talking about then. Now we don't have that system, but it still serves the same purpose. You have to know who your God is. If they knew who their God is, and he is one and only one, beside whom there is no other, they wouldn't have done these things. And that's what he's mad about, because they're denying who he really is. 13, and this is the second thing you do. You cover the altar of the Lord with tears, with weeping and crying. So he does not regard the offering anymore, nor receive it with goodwill from your hands. Now this is something that may be common where you come from, in the religion you're in. I don't know how common it is, I just know where we come from. They cover the altar with tears and weeping, and that's all they do. And I'm not saying God doesn't regard it, but according to this, he doesn't regard it. I don't know why he would regard it. It's all just emotionalism, it's just all theatrics, it's just all a type of public self-gratification, to put it as politely as I can. It is people just getting in tune with themselves and touching themselves in public so they can impress people, or maybe they think they're impressing God. But as God said, these people that make these long-winded prayers and standing on street corners and making themselves seen, they have the reward. People who do these things have the reward. We come from a very charismatic system, and they cover that tear with weeping and crying and tears and all this stuff. He doesn't regard it. I don't believe he does, because that's not what the Spirit compels you to do. The Spirit is sane. The Spirit is sane. It's not crazy. It's not lunatic. It doesn't look like an insane person. 14. Yet you say, for what reason? In other words, he says, I don't regard your offerings anymore. And so they say, well, for what reason? He says, because the Lord has been witness between you and the wife of your youth, with whom you have dealt treacherously. Yet she is your companion and your wife by covenant. That's where it really came through. They were unfaithful to their wives. They made a covenant with their wives and they're unfaithful to them. Because it all starts back at, who is your God, and do you know who your God is? As soon as you lose track or lose touch with the person of your God, that's where all these things come from. That's why it's all rooted in who he is. And that's why when he came here, he said, he that believes in me and the one who sent me, or he who believes in the words I say and the one that sent me, has entered from death into life. That's where it all starts. You have to know who your God is and believe in that, because that's where all truth comes from, because he is the truth. So as soon as you dilute that or diminish that by letting other gods into your life, like I said earlier, the genius of the devil, he made God himself the other gods. You are deluded. You are a deluded person because you diluted your God. Your God is several people. You don't know who your God is. You can't know who your God is. So it's going to lead to all these things, these abominations and treachery against your own spouse. And just all kinds of sin. All sin comes from not knowing who your God is. If you know who your God is, you can only gain more understanding. You can only gain more truth. But as soon as you deny who he is, which the Trinity is, it's a way of denying who your God is by saying this one is God, but he's not that one. That's not only nonsensical, it's demonic. It's demonic to say that this person is God, but he's not this person of God. That's another thing. I did a video on this too, or several videos, about the fact that God, the God of this world, gets you to deny your God. You deny your God. If you've seen that famous Trinity illustration where it's got the triangle and says this one is not that one, you are saying that Jesus is not God because he's not the Father. And the Father is not God because he's not the other two. And the Spirit is not God because he is not the other two. God is not God, so God is diminished. God is diluted. God is now pretty much what you want him to be. So hey, go ahead and commit adultery. That's why people do it. That's why churches are filled with adulterers and drug takers and drunks and liars and cheats and the whole bit. It's all because they don't believe in who their God really is. And they have forsaken that. And that's what Malachi is admonishing them over here. Did he not make them one, having a remnant of the Spirit? So it was the Spirit that unified them. The Spirit of God that was in them is what made them one. Because they not only fell from God, they fell from each other. When they chose to trust basically in themselves as individuals by listening to the serpent, they divided themselves from each other. It wasn't just from God that the division came. The division came between the man and the woman once they chose to trust themselves. That's where that happens. If they trusted God, they would have remained united, that one flesh, as he meant it to be. So he started again, but did he not make them one, having a remnant of the Spirit? And why one? He asked the question. Same word, ECHAD. That word that they say means more than one, or a multiplicity of persons and people and things and gods and whatever. Why one? The answer, he seeks godly offspring. Godly offspring. You get godly offspring from two people that are joined together in the knowledge of who their God is. And that's what would have made godly offspring. It's already too late for that as far as that goes. I'm not talking about this in the context that we can bring this back together by having godly children and if we all get together and know our God is one and get married. But I'm saying when he made them, man and woman, he made them in his image, man and woman made he them. It's so he could have godly offspring, but they fell before they had any offspring. That's why the first one murdered. The first one lost touch with who their God is. The first one was fathered and mothered by someone or some two who did not know who their God really is because it was diluted. It may not be they were out there burning incense and making sacrifices to fake golden calves or anything, but it was diluted. They no longer understood perfectly who their God is. They were no longer one together in their God, and they did not really understand who their God is. So their first son, Cain, came out and murdered their second son. This is what happens when you don't know who your God is. But he's restored that now, and he's made it even better than they could have it if they had never sinned. But I just want to point this out because it has to do with the knowledge of your one God. That's where all your strength is. That's where all the truth is. That's where all peace is. That's where all acceptance is. How can he accept you if you think he's of them, if he's not who he is? He can't fully accept that. That would be like endorsing that. He's saying it's a good thing. That's why he makes the note about he doesn't accept their offerings. He doesn't accept their weeping and all their idolatrous activity. That's all about them. That's that's how we can make it about ourselves is when we diminish him and dilute him. When he is literally everything, then we do whatever we do in his name and with an understanding that he is everything. And it's not about us and our tears and our weeping and our ceremonial whatevers. So he seeks godly offspring. And then it goes again to the quote. It says, therefore take heed to your spirit and let none deal treacherously with the wife of his youth. So he's just giving this example of what people did, what it led to dilute who your God is. And they just did it on their own. I don't think they're going around offering or arguing about ECHAD and saying, well, ECHAD means several gods. No, they just went after other gods. They just went all the way. That's why I say it's genius on the part of the devil, so to speak, that he made God himself the other gods. It's just wicked. It's wicked. And so people come up with these And when I say people, I mean these doctrinaires, these theologians, these apologists, these scholars. They come up with these arguments that say one means many or several united together, and so on and so forth. It's not in there, folks. It's not in there. You can study it. It doesn't mean that. When it talks about us, when it talks about a place, when it talks about a person, that is not talking about several people united. It's talking about God. The one person of God. That's it. That's it. Know who your God is, and you will have freedom in that, and you will have the truth in that. And that's my thought on ECHAD. Hopefully that came across clear. In Jesus' name.